Sunlight floods a quiet liquor store. The only sounds are the beep of the scanner and the polite voice of the cashier. The atmosphere is one of complete tranquility. A man enters. He doesn't look dangerous. He walks silently toward the back. The camera follows him. He takes the first bottle from the shelf. A pause. Then, he smashes it forcefully on the floor. The sound is deafening. Over the next 10 minutes, this man will destroy $10,000 worth of merchandise. But the craziest part isn't what he did. It's why he did it. The sound was like a gunshot in a library. It was so out of place that it shattered reality. Witnesses experience an effect that psychologists call cognitive paralysis. For a few seconds, the brain simply refuses to believe what is happening. Rivers of alcohol flow across the floor. Shards of glass fly in every direction. Over 500 bottles, cognac, whiskey, gin. Everything turned into a sticky, alcohol-reeking mess. $10,000. At the time, that was the average annual salary in this region. The smell in the room was like a chemical attack. The acrid mix of sugar, tannins, and evaporating ethanol literally stung the eyes. But look at the man himself. He isn't shouting. He doesn't look angry. He is working. Methodically. Almost like on an assembly line. Pick up a bottle, smash it, pick up the next. This calmness amidst the chaos is the main source of anxiety. It doesn't look like a fit of rage. It's something else. His movements resembled a factory robot, emotionless, efficient, with a calculated trajectory. Criminologists call this instrumental aggression. It's when violence isn't an outburst of emotion, it's simply a tool to achieve a goal. Police officers enter the store, weapons drawn. They see the devastation. And in the middle of it all, a completely calm man. He notices them and simply stops. He doesn't resist. He doesn't try to run. He just waits. According to police protocol, such passivity after mass destruction is a huge red flag. This is called incongruent behavior. It almost always points to one of two things, either a severe mental disorder or a premeditated plan where arrest is part of the design. An officer looks at him, completely bewildered. He asks the only possible question. Why? Thomas answers in a steady, almost bored voice. A giant blue caterpillar told me to do it. In psychiatry, this is called a bizarre delusion. It's a belief so detached from reality that it cannot be a product of life experience. For any expert, this is an almost certain marker of psychosis, an alarm signal that is impossible to ignore. His name was Thomas, 42 years old, an accountant, no criminal record. Not a single complaint from his neighbors. His life was so ordinary it seemed invisible. This is what psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley called the mask of sanity, a perfect facade that hides either deep internal chaos or cold calculation. Now, put yourself in the detective's shoes. A calm, educated man is sitting before you, talking about a talking caterpillar. You have only two options. First, he is dangerously ill and needs to be isolated immediately. Second, he is an incredibly cunning malingerer, putting on a show to avoid prison. What does your gut tell you right now? Remember that answer. This is the classic dilemma known in forensics as the monotone dichotomy. Right now, your intuition is fighting a cognitive bias, the halo effect. His calmness and flawless biography make us doubt his insanity. We look for a simpler explanation. He faces years in prison for felony vandalism. But there is another path. If he is found not guilty by reason of insanity, he will avoid a prison cell. However, he will not be set free. He will be sent to a psychiatric hospital for an indefinite period. Prison is a contract with a clear end date. A court-ordered hospital stay is a subscription with no unsubscribe button. It is renewed automatically until doctors decide you are well. And that might never happen. So, what was it? Let's start with the simplest explanation, an acute psychotic episode. This is a state where reality breaks. The brain begins to generate its own world with hallucinations and delusions. And a blue caterpillar, that's straight out of a textbook. Especially if it wasn't just an image, but a voice. In the DSM-5, the primary guide for all psychiatrists, this is called an auditory command hallucination. It's when the voice doesn't suggest, but commands. For a person in such a state, it's not a choice. It's like a waking nightmare where your own brain has become a mad puppeteer, and you are just a marionette. But there is a deep crack in this theory. Psychosis is chaos. It's an explosion. And Thomas didn't explode. He worked, methodically, like a bomb disposal expert diffusing one mine after another. He didn't scream at the caterpillar or argue with it. He simply performed the task. Psychiatrists call this the preservation of goal-directed activity. And when that is present, it's a very strong argument against a diagnosis of acute psychosis. This brings us to the second theory, malingering. Perhaps Thomas isn't crazy. Perhaps he's a genius. He chose an excuse so absurd that it's easier to believe than a common lie. In forensic psychiatry, there is a similar phenomenon, Ganser syndrome. This is when a malingerer, feigning insanity, gives deliberately nonsensical, almost correct answers. The choice of a blue caterpillar, a character from Alice in Wonderland, is too literary, too theatrical for a genuine delusion. Now, imagine you are the expert. Your task is to separate theater from illness. You start asking tricky questions. How big was the caterpillar? Did it have legs? What color were its eyes? A malingerer will start frantically inventing details, trying to build a logical picture. A person in a real psychotic state often doesn't remember such specifics. Their delusion is real to them, but not always detailed. Then you apply a consistency test. You ask the same questions a day later, a week later. The fabricated story will begin to fall apart. The malingerer will get tangled in their own testimony, but the patient's story will remain disturbingly stable. But there is a third path, the strangest one. What if it's not illness and not malingering? What if it's a performance, a symbolic act, a protest? In the 60s, there was an art movement called Fluxus. Artists staged absurd events to convey their message. They broke things, behaved strangely. They turned life into art and crime into a manifesto. Perhaps Thomas intuitively did the same. He created a happening to finally be heard. So we have three versions: psychosis, cold calculation, or art protest. Each seems plausible, and each is flawed in some way. The police and doctors were ready to enter this logical dead end with him. If it weren't for one detail, one single type of bottle that Thomas never even touched, this detail is like a singularity in physics, a point where all known theories cease to work. It transforms this medical case into a true detective story. Let's look at the camera footage again, but this time with focus. Here he is, smashing expensive whiskey. Here, cheap wine. And here, he walks past an entire shelf of imperial brandy. He looks at it and moves on. Not a single bottle of this brand was harmed. In forensics, this is called evidence by absence, like in the famous Sherlock Holmes story where the main clue was the dog that didn't bark. What matters here are not the broken bottles, but the ones that remained intact. This isn't just a detail, it's a screaming message. This completely shatters the theory of a random psychotic episode. Madness is indiscriminate. It doesn't read labels or choose brands. This introduces motive into the equation. Now, the giant blue caterpillar looks like a diversionary tactic. The question changes from why did he do it to what's wrong with imperial brandy. The investigation turns 180 degrees. It's like a magician's trick. While everyone was watching the bright, absurd caterpillar in one hand, he was performing the main trick with the other. He transforms from a patient into a strategist. The detectives start digging. They check Thomas's connection to this brand, and they find it. It turns out that Thomas had worked as an accountant for 15 years at the company that produces Imperial. And 2 weeks before the incident, he was fired. In any detective show, this is called establishing a link. Until this moment, Thomas was only connected to the store. Now, a second, much stronger thread appeared, leading directly to his past. The case was no longer a random act of vandalism. It became an act of revenge. At this point, our imaginary scale of insanity drops sharply. The needle shifts from psychosis to cold calculation. The caterpillar story turns from a tragedy into a farce. a smokescreen. But why was it necessary if the motive was already becoming obvious? The caterpillar isn't an excuse. It's a weapon. It's like a flashbang grenade. Its purpose is not to inflict damage, but to blind and disorient the opponent, in this case, the justice system, to buy time and space for the main maneuver. So here it is, the maneuver. 15 years of impeccable service, and then fired in a single day. No explanation, no compensation, just a cold letter on his desk. He tried to sue. He lost. The corporate lawyers ground him into dust. This was an act of powerless rage, but not a blind one. Thomas was a small man who couldn't strike a direct blow against a giant, so he chose an asymmetric response. He turned a public space into a theater of war. He attacked not the factory itself, but its symbol, its product. The unbroken bottles, they aren't just a clue, they are his banner, raised on enemy territory, a message that was impossible to ignore. But why the caterpillar then? It was his insurance, his legal jujitsu. He knew he would be caught. By claiming insanity, he threw a wrench into the gears of justice. He created a media and legal frenzy. This gave him two things. First, maximum attention to his story. Second, a chance to delay the process, get an evaluation, and possibly a lighter sentence. He used the system's complexity against itself. The caterpillar wasn't a shield, it was a lever. How did it all end? Psychiatrists found him sane, but with one important caveat. His condition was defined as a state of affect caused by a prolonged psychotraumatic situation. It's not psychosis, but it's not cold calculation either. Imagine a crack in a dam. The firing was that crack, and his rampage in the store was not the entire dam bursting. It was a controlled, yet still destructive breach of water through that crack. The court took the motive into account. Thomas received a suspended sentence and a huge fine to cover the damages. His plan worked, but only partially. This story isn't about madness. It's a story about how the system can drive an ordinary person to absurd theater just to finally be heard. The blue caterpillar is a viral meme he instinctively created. In our world of information noise, only the strangest, most ridiculous images break through. He infected the media space with his story. Thomas lost in court, but he won elsewhere. He made all of us talk about him and his story. His method, though destructive, contains a powerful lesson about human psychology. This is what could be called the caterpillar protocol. We all know Occam's razor. It teaches us to cut away everything unnecessary to find the simplest explanation. The caterpillar protocol works in reverse. It forces you to look for a hidden motive in the most absurd, most seemingly unnecessary detail, because that's often where the key is hidden. This protocol teaches three things. First, when you look at chaos, search for order in what is missing. Artists call this the principle of negative space. The void around an object defines the object itself. In Thomas's story, the negative space is the shelf of untouched brandy. It tells us more than the thousands of shards on the floor. It screams of intent. Second, the more absurd the smokescreen, the simpler and more human the thing it conceals. This is the rule of inverse proportionality. The grotesque blue caterpillar was needed to hide a very simple, almost banal motive, the revenge of a fired employee. People build the highest walls around their most vulnerable places. The most painful truth is often hidden behind the most ridiculous lie. And third, Thomas's act was not the goal. It was the trigger. His real goal was the second-order effects. Not the broken bottles, but the arrest, the trial, the media attention. He was playing the long game. He didn't just want to cause damage. He wanted to turn his personal grievance into a public humiliation for the corporation. And now, knowing all this, the main question arises. What do you consider Thomas to be? A victim of a system, driven to despair, or a cold-blooded manipulator? Write just one word in the comments, victim or manipulator, because your answer is a litmus test. It says less about Thomas and more about you, about whose side you are on, the side of the system that broke him, or the side of the man who decided to break it in return.